This afternoon, we're continuing our series on calling. This is a talk entitled Call to Go. It's about church planting. But before I go on and say any more about church planting and Call to Go, I just want to say, just sort of lead into that by saying something just about the moment we're in. Because it does feel like winter is looming long before us, doesn't it? This increase in COVID cases that we see on the news every single night at the moment is concerning for all of us, and it does look like lockdown's going to get worse before it gets better, doesn't it? How are you feeling about all this? I know that I've been finding it quite hard, if I'm honest. I'm feeling right now emotionally drained and like the tank is not very full. Thankfully, I'm going away for a few days holiday, so I'm hoping I'll feel a bit better after that. But I'm so conscious that our experience of this crisis differs from person to person. But I do sense that many feel it's almost like there's a sense of being mildly traumatized. It's almost like there's a sense of grieving. Life was not supposed to be like this. This is not what we expected for 2020. Energy levels are low, and the things that normally bring us life are either are not possible. And some of us, on top of all of that, have financial worries as well. And I think at times like this, it's perfectly normal and human to feel all kinds of different emotions. It's easy to feel a failure, to feel like I'm not doing enough or I'm not handling this very well. It's easy to succumb to temptation, to be short-tempered or to indulge in fleshly desires. It's easy to kind of rail against those in charge, like the government or the local council, and just say they're not handling it very well. It's even possible to get angry with God. So where can we find help and hope? Sometimes I find it really helpful to live for long periods from one passage of Scripture. And personally, all through COVID, I've been living with this sweep of Scripture that goes from the crisis of the cross to the other side of Pentecost. And I've just been living with the disciples and their experience of that. And I think that because we've been in crisis, I've been able to identify with them like never before, and understand something of their thoughts and feelings that they must have had like never before. Having them as companions on the journey and seeing how God dealt with them has really helped give me strength and hope. I think it's really hard to overstate what a crisis the cross was for them. All their hopes had been dashed. They were carrying this massive sense of failure because of Peter's denials and falling asleep at Gethsemane. They'd all been effectively furloughed because they had been following Jesus around and helping him, but of course Jesus had died and he wasn't there anymore. And they were in this state where they were shocked, traumatized, tired, anxious, and uncertain about the future. It all sounds quite close to home, doesn't it? The disciples were broken. They were living in a kind of vacuum because they had nothing to do. And because they had nothing to do, they went back fishing, back to what was familiar to them. But as we've just read, they weren't having much success, were they? And I think they weren't having much success because actually God wasn't calling them to be fishermen. He was calling them to be fishers of men. Fruit happens when our lives are aligned with the call of God. The disciples were failing at fishing, but enter Jesus, and the situation was turned around. The miracle happened, a miraculous catch of fish took place. And of course, if you know John's Gospel, or the Gospels rather, we know that this was not the first time that Jesus had performed a miraculous catch of fish for the disciples, and specifically for Peter. There was this first miraculous catch of fish when Jesus first called Peter. And I think Jesus did this deliberately because he wanted to remind Peter of what he was actually called to. Not fishing for fish, but fishing for men. But it's interesting that Peter didn't realize that it was Jesus at first. It was actually John that said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And isn't that true that sometimes we need others, especially if times are difficult, we need others to help us see how Jesus is active in our situation, to identify his voice speaking to us. It was the voice of Jesus, the presence of Jesus, that made all the difference in this situation. But when Peter did finally realize that it was Jesus, I think he probably instantly recognized the significance of what had just happened. Jesus, as we've said, was reminding him of his call to fish for men. But in order to respond to that call, Peter still needed to get over his massive sense of failure. So Jesus invited Peter to come and have breakfast with him on the beach. And there we have probably one of the most moving scenes in the whole of Scripture, as Jesus tenderly and lovingly spoke to Peter around that fire, around that breakfast fire. Jesus forgave Peter and restored Peter and spoke to Peter again of his call and of his God-given purpose. And somehow, I think, because of Peter's brokenness and because of this vacuum he was in, Peter was able to receive the words of Jesus and to understand his call and purpose in a new way, like he hadn't before. I think probably Peter understood for the first time that this call to fish for men was essentially a call to make disciples, just like Jesus had made him into a disciple. And it was a call, effectively, to plant churches. Peter would, of course, become one of the overseers of this amazing church planting movement as new communities of faith were set up all over the ancient world. But what about you? Is there a sense for you during lockdown that maybe you've got distracted by things that God is not calling you to, that in some kind of metaphorical way you've gone fishing? Maybe the lack of church as we know it, the lack of sort of contact with other Christians has meant that it's been difficult for you to kind of feel close to Jesus and to hear his voice. And maybe you've got waylaid or lost sight of Jesus. I'm just going to pause there because I want to ask David to come. Just when we were praying before the service started, David felt God, he didn't know what I was going to speak about today, but he felt God speak about something. So rather than me repeat, I'll ask David to share.
I just had a picture of, sort of each of us sitting in a car and our foot wanting to press the accelerator and start to speed life up again, sort of maybe in a sense of impatience or a sense of just a desire to get going again. And I just felt God wanting to kind of stop us in our tracks and say, just wait, let's talk this out together so that you don't go off on the wrong trajectory or go off on an unsafe path. I want us to talk about this together, and before you do put your foot on the accelerator, let's chart a course together. So it's a case of God stopping us in our tracks and wanting to talk it through together.
Thanks, David. And so I think that I'm just wondering whether it's possible that Jesus is speaking to you. Is it possible that you've not realized that it is Jesus? And maybe we're just recognizing that it might be. I wonder if Jesus might be inviting you, metaphorically in some way, to go and have breakfast with him on the beach. I wonder what that might look like. Do you need to just press pause, just slow down and stop and spend some time with Jesus? When all is stripped away, like it has been during this crisis, if we let it can be a place that God can speak to us really, really clearly. You know that I've really loved that Matt Redman song that I'm sure you know, and I found it's really spoken to me. And it goes like this: when the music fades, all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing that I've made it, when it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. How might you have felt God speaking to you in the last few weeks and the last few months? Maybe you need a John in your life to help you recognize the voice of Jesus. I wonder if there's a friend or friends with whom you can meet and pray. And I really know and understand it's not easy to experience relationship and community and connection right now. We've been working hard to kind of reconstruct church. And as we do this, we know that we need to bring more kind of structure to how we connect and a new kind of structure to how we connect. Our focus in the sort of short term, of course, has been on just getting these services back up and running. And we've been running with this sort of experimental service pattern. It's like a bit of a holding pattern. It's just felt like the best way to make church available to the greatest number given the restrictions that we're living under. Apparently, we learned this week that we're one of only 2 Anglican churches in the whole of the city that are doing multiple services and children's groups on a Sunday. And of course, we will review our service pattern before we settle on a long-term pattern. But services aside, the next phase is to try and bring an increased sense of clarity of vision and structure to small groups and home groups and what happens outside of church, because it's so difficult to do anything in here at the moment. But if you're looking for connection and community, don't wait for us before you seek people out. A model of connection that I think can be really powerful at the moment is where you meet with just 1 or 2 other people regularly to pray together. That's just easy to do. You can do it within current restrictions. It's possible to go for a walk with 1 or 2 other people or meet on Zoom and pray. And if you want help to arrange that, please let us know. But it was back to our story, it was in the middle of the crisis of the cross that Peter experienced this call, or the reaffirmation, if you like, of his call to go and make disciples and plant churches. What about us? Well, that is our call too, is it not? The church planting call is taking shape with St. Peter's down in Oadby. And of course, it may seem a strange time to be talking about doing something as significant as that of planting a church in another place. But I just believe that this is how God is leading us. We signed this partnership agreement with St. Peter's Church, the 2 PCCs, and we signed that literally just before lockdown happened in March. And I think the timing of that was really significant, because I think that it was like God wanted us to reach that kind of point of no return before lockdown began, so that, if you like, there was no going back from it. St. Peter's have really struggled during lockdown. We've been so blessed to have a team of people, a team of clergy and other staff members, which has meant that we've been able to organise church online and do pastoral care and all that kind of stuff. But St. Peter's have had none of that. And it's been a really hard time for them to be church without a vicar. And we feel at the moment this just really strong call to serve them. It's part of what being resourcing church is all about. I read recently this amazing story from France during the period of the bubonic plague. The nuns at one city hospital, having no fear of death, tended the sick with all sweetness and humility. New nuns replaced those who died until most had died. And that level of sacrifice, that willingness to serve is really moving, isn't it? And like those nuns, we feel called to serve St. Peter's at this time of trial for them. But more than that, we want to do something with St. Peter's like we heard Jenny talking about with Holy Apostles. So just a reminder of the vision behind that. Why church planting? Well, John Tern spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. But just a really brief recap. We believe in church planting because it is, research has shown it is one of the most effective ways of reaching the 93% of people that don't go to church. Our vision is to church plant because we believe doing so is in obedience to the Great Commission, and it's our vision to church plant because so many churches out there are really struggling and desperately need a shot of life, need revitalising. But I think the most powerful reason that we feel called to church planting is because it's in our blood to do so. The revitalisation of the life of St. John's that we've experienced in these past few years has come about due to the sacrificial generosity of Holy Trinity in sending a team of people here, along with their financial giving, and also, and equally important, due to the grace of people and generosity of people here, the existing congregation here, who received that team from Holy Trinity. We've experienced this and seen the power of church revitalization in making disciples and establishing new ministries, and we want to do it for others. And it's not insignificant that Jenny, during her time here, her year here, that's when she really caught the vision and caught the sense of call for her to go and do that. And it was very moving to hear her talk about what's happened at Holy Apostles as well. Since she's been there. So that's why church planting, but why St. Peter's? St. Peter's has come about due to a number of factors. Firstly, the needs. We've heard how they're a church that's struggling. They've not really had full-time leadership at St. Peter's for many years now. There's been a real sense of connection with St. Peter's through different relationships and conversations, and also just a real sense of the Spirit leading us. There's been some really specific and clear prophetic words about both Oadby and St. Peter's. And so the vision specifically for St. Peter's, I'm going to ask John to come up and share just his very brief sense of vision for St. Peter's. So come on, John.
I've got it.
Oh, you got it. Of course you have.
Yes, so I've just got a minute for you. So there must be hundreds of churches up and down the country that just haven't had the time, the investment, the care for them to truly flourish. But what if teams of people, small teams, began to offer themselves to those church communities, to go low, to serve them, to honour those people that have been slogging away for years, that they might offer some leadership, some direction, some energy, that they would unlock the potential that has just been there for ages, that massive potential, and just really release it, so that those churches would, in their turn, transform their communities with the power that the gospel always brings. And so St. Peter's, in their turn, would then be able to potentially then plant again and do that for another church. That's it.
Thank you. Very good. He gets better at it every time. So from now on, we're going to get more and more involved in the life of St. Peter's, and we're just really carefully in thinking and planning about how we do this, because John, of course, will be supporting them on Sundays, but we're also making sure that he's got enough time here to build relationships, with the idea that we'll build a small team of people from St. John's to go with him to St. Peter's. It's just going to be a gradual. I don't think there's going to be a kind of big bang at St. Peter's. We're just going to gradually get more and more involved. And somewhere along that line, then John and I are going to be licensed to the church at St. Peter's. I'm going to be licensed as team vicar, him as curate. My role will be oversight, but John's, so I'll be kind of in the background. John will be the one bringing day-to-day leadership to the church. Initially, we'll have a particular focus on reaching young families. They don't have any young families at St. Peter's, or maybe just one or two. And so it's likely that will look like a new service that will start from scratch on a Sunday afternoon. And John will seek to do this hyper-relationally, developing a real sense of missional community. We'll also seek to run Alpha initially for the church and then beyond, and in time develop a strategy to reach young adults and students. St. Peter's, of course, is like the civic church in Oadby as well, so that because of that, there's all kinds of interesting and exciting community links that we'll investigate. But I'm really excited about sending John and Beth and Eliana going off to St. Peter's. They are just like the best people, and it's actually part of the real cost of this call we have to church, is that we have to give people like John and Beth away. He is just emerging into a fantastic leader. He's done some really great work here at St. John's with Alpha and young adults and interns. He's a really good preacher, and he's a fantastic worship leader and can also do youth work. So he really is the full package. And I know he's going to do a really good job down there. In terms of building team, again, the idea of people leaving here to go to St. Peter's is all part of the cost. It's costly for us to see people go. And it's obviously quite tricky. It's a strange time to be building team, because it's just hard to build for John to build a sense of relationship with people. And I think actually the process of building team is probably going to be quite drawn out and protracted, therefore. But nonetheless, we feel called to do this, and we are responding in obedience to that call. So we want to ask the question of all of us: might you feel called to be part of the team that goes to St. Peter's? Might God just be speaking to you like he spoke to Peter in the midst of crisis about church planting? The call to go to revitalize St. Peter's is, of course, a call for all of us, not just for those of us who will go. It's a call for those of us who will stay. So even if you don't, and you know that you're not called to go as part of the team to St. Peter's, I wonder if you might feel a strong sense of call to pray or to give financially towards that project, because it really needs prayer and it really needs money to turn that church around. You, just very, very briefly, how might you know if you're called to go to St. Peter's? Well, firstly, that you feel excited, that what I'm saying is stirring you, that you feel excited about St. Peter's specifically, or OB in general. Maybe you live there, or might even feel willing to move there. That you're ready to count the cost of leaving a relatively well-resourced church like St. John's and move down to a very under-resourced church like St. Peter's. Maybe you have some sense of what you have to offer them. If you feel even the slightest inkling that you might feel called to go to St. Peter's, please come and talk to us. I remember having so many conversations with people from Holy Trinity who were praying and asking God whether they might feel called to come to St. John's. And I remember being so moved by conversations with the people who were genuinely seeking God and genuinely willing to say yes to the call of God, even though it would be costly for them. But I also remember, it was costly, but I remember that it felt like a real adventure. Church planting is a step into the unknown, but it's a real adventure of faith. And it's an adventure about doing something new to bring hope and life to a place that has been struggling. So I'm going to stop there, but just want to leave us with some questions to ponder, and then John's going to lead us in some time to pray with and for one another. So just maybe you respond to that word that David broke. You've just had that sense of, I know how tempting I felt that, to just push the accelerator because I want to get things going again. I want to get life going again. But somehow I've just felt a check in your spirit that God's just saying, no, even though this is weird, wait, make sure you're doing this in step with me and in step with my spirit. Are you someone that's struggling to see and hear from the risen Jesus in your situation? Do you need a friend to help point him out? How might you find someone that you can talk with and pray with about that? Do you feel Jesus inviting you to come and have breakfast with him? What does that look like for you? Do you need to take some time out to be with Jesus? And do you feel called to either go to St. Peter's or to pray for St. Peter's or to give financially towards St. Peter's?